Roll call.
Gray.
Here.
Harding.
Here.
Melton.
Here.
Pauls.
Here.
Palermo.
Here.
Festerson.
Here.
Mr. President.
Here. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for opening remarks by Councilmember Brinker Harding.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Just short and sweet. Days are getting shorter. The leaves are falling. Colors of the leaves are, the colors of the leaves are falling. The wind's blowing them around. We have 2 agenda items today that deal with snow. I think winter's here. Daylight savings time ends in 12 days, and I miss the fall already. So enjoy what's left of it, because it's not going to be very long.
An affidavit of publication is on file for the pre-council and city council meeting, and a current copy of the Open Meeting Act is posted in a white binder on the east wall of the legislative chambers.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Omaha City Council. We thank you for joining us today. As a courtesy to those in attendance, as well as to facilitate the conduct of our business, we ask that you please turn off or silence all electronic devices. Madam Clerk.
Item 6, a resolution to approve the preliminary plat for North Streams Replat 1, located southwest of 202nd and I Streets. Planning Board and Planning Department recommend approval.
The public hearing on item 6 begins at this time. Are there any proponents?
Yes, Mr. President, members of the council, Larry Jovan, 11440 West Center Road, appearing on behalf of the applicant. This is simply just a replat of an area that's already been platted and approved by this council. There's really no change in the lots, just a little bit of change in the Polk right-of-way, but the lot configuration is essentially the same. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? The public hearing is closed. Roll call.
Gray. Harding. Melton. Pauls. Palermo. Festerson. Mr. President.
Yes.
Item 6 is approved, 7-0. Item 7, a resolution to approve the preliminary plat for Anchor View located at 17550 Potter Street. Planning Board and Planning Department recommend approval.
The public hearing on item 7 begins at this time. Are there any proponents?
Yes, Mr. President, members of the council, Larry Jovan, 11440 West Center Road, appearing on behalf of the applicant. This is just another phase of the Anchor Point development that's adjacent to the Anchor Point Villa properties. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? The public hearing is closed. Roll call.
Gray. Yes. Harding. Yes. Melton. Yes. Pauls. Yes. Palermo. Yes. Festerson. Yes. Mr. President.
Yes.
Item 7 is approved, 7-0. Items 8 to 10 can be considered together for Fairmont Creamery, located at 12th and Jones Street. Planning Board and Planning Department recommend approval. Item 8, an ordinance to rezone this property from DS to CBD district. Items 9 and 10 are resolutions to approve the preliminary plat and final plat for Fairmont Creamery.
The public hearing on items 8 through 10 begin at this time. Are there any proponents?
Morning, Mr. President, members of the council. Mike McIntosh, 14710 West Dodge Road. Here with Lamprey and Earson representing the owner. This is a fairly simple kind of cleanup plat and rezoning, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? The public hearing is closed. Second, roll call.
Gray. Yes. Harding. Melton. Yes. Pauls. Yes. Palermo. Yes. Festerson. Yes. Mr. President.
Yes.
Items 8 through 10 are approved, 6-0. Harding abstains.
If we could keep the front center row empty, you can sit on the sides if you like. We're doing that so the speaker can have distancing. Thank you.
Item 11, a resolution to approve the 1420 Rose Court Tax Increment Financing Redevelopment Project Plan located at 1420 Villa Rose Court in an amount up to $250,000.
The public hearing on item 11 begins at this time. Are there any proponents?
Yeah, good afternoon. Don Seaton, on behalf of the Omaha City Planning Department. The 1420 Rose Court TIF project, it's a row house project. Holy Name Housing is undertaking the project. It's an affordable housing project. You may recall the property is located just north of I-80 near 13th Street. It's rezoned recently. They plan on doing 16 row homes. They're arranged in 3 structures. Low-income housing tax credit project. There's also some city home funds in the project. Holy Name's been very busy in the north part of the city. It's nice to see a little bit of affordable housing in the south part of the city as well. This is a $6 million project. They're requesting $250,000 in TIF support. It's been approved by the TIF committee and by the planning board. We ask for your approval.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents?
Mike Gawley, 4324 4th Street, Executive Director of Holy Name Housing. Certainly willing to answer any questions you have about this project.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents?
Thank you. Larry Storr, 5015 Lafayette Avenue, Omaha, 68132. I am against item 11, as I am against practically all tax increment financing descriptions, and this is the reason why. Particularly now that a description on our election ballot this time describes it as a period of repayment. Well, repayment by who? The builder or the property owners in the area. They want to extend it to 20 years instead of 5. And I guess this is under the home rule charter and stuff, so we're now in the business of mortgage lending. But you know, if you think about it in just plain common sense terms, it's like a bait and switch or Wimpy Burger. I'll pay you tomorrow for a hamburger today, next 20 years. It's who's going to guarantee that the builder actually pays that? I don't think that's the case. I think what you're betting on is that the property owners will actually pay it from higher property taxes over a 20-year period, higher and higher and higher. We're already number 8 in the nation for high property taxes. People are moving out because of it. As soon as we're number 10, which won't be very long because all of these things are going up around Omaha, pretty soon there won't be enough people to sell them. Then who's going to pay for destruction of those properties? Thank you.
Are there any other opponents? Public hearing is closed. I have Councilmember Gray. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to take the opportunity and take the time here to let people know that the way TIF was described to you a few minutes ago, that's not how it works. And for an individual to continue to come down here and misrepresent information is, first of all, disrespectful to this council, number one. But number two, it leads the community to believe something that isn't true. The fact of the matter is, if you want to know more about TIF and how tax increment financing works, you can talk to Don or you can talk to Bridget Hadley about how that works. They will tell you how, as TIF projects have come on the rolls over a period of more than 20 years or so, how those projects have paid themselves off. They don't use taxpayer dollars to do that. Those are dollars that the developer has to pay over a period of time for this project. So when you hear these kinds of things, sometimes we as a council let it go. Today, I'm not letting it go. The fact of the matter is that TIF works, and it works primarily in areas of low income where poverty is strong. In other areas, it gives the opportunity for development in those areas that, but for TIF, would not have occurred. So for those who are in the listening audience today who may be watching on television, the way it was described to you earlier by the opponent that got up is totally wrong. And if you want more information about it, Don is more than willing to do it. I know Bridget Hadley does it on a regular basis. We have a TIF committee. They can send you the documentation on TIF over the years and how each of these projects have paid themselves off. And the fact of the matter is but for TIF, some of these projects would not have occurred. And if they don't occur, those are projects that are not on the tax, that would not have been on the tax rolls today, but for that. And so then the city and the county and others and the school districts and others are starting to, they recognize that when they get this money back over a period of time, they know how this works. So I just want people to do your homework, because there's some people that come in here who don't even bother to do their homework. But do your homework and you'll find out how well TIF works and how well it's been working over the years. Thank you, Mr. President. And with that, I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Councilmember Gray. Councilmember Melton, you're recognized.
Thank you, and I seconded Councilman Gray's motion to approve. And actually, I was just on, if you go to the Omaha City Council, to our agenda, and you click on the TIF application, you know, it gives you all the information. Everything that Councilman Gray just said is actually detailed for purposes of each and every project, and it gives the cost-benefit analysis. So all you have to do is go and read it, and you can read it for each individual project. And it upsets me too that every time they said, how are we gonna pay it back, and we're a bank and we're loaning money. TIF is not a loan. We've gone through it before, but for everybody else out there, I know Mr. Storr, we've done it over and over and over. This is not a loan from the city. It's simply, we defer the increase in property tax over time, but the developer still has to pay the full amount. It just pays back a loan from a bank. If he fails to pay the bank loan, that's between him and his bank. The taxpayers do not pay for it. And so everything that Mr. Storr had said was absolutely incorrect. I wanted to back up what Councilman Gray said. And projects like this are exactly what we want TIF, the TIF projects for. It's these projects. It's low-income housing that people can afford. These are 4-bedroom townhomes. So often there's low-income housing, but they're apartments and they're small. And if you have a family and you have children, oftentimes there's a very limited amount of low-income family housing for people. So I think this project is absolutely great. I think that the amount of TIF, which is $250,000, and by the way, that money is used for public improvements as well. The streets and the roads and the utilities and the things that are being built are for the public use. It's not just the developer that benefits from this. And here, it's a nonprofit. So we have a nonprofit group, Holy Name, that is building out these houses. I can't think of anything negative about this project. I am so thankful to Holy Name that they are doing this project and again, balancing out so that we're getting low-income housing on both sides of our city and not just concentrating everything in one area. So these row houses are great. And again, I would encourage you, it's 52 pages long. If you want to see the cost-benefit analysis and see the truth of where the money comes from, who pays it, not the citizens of Omaha or the taxpayers of Omaha, please click on the agenda item. It's item number 12, or item number 11, and you can look at the entire TIF application. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Melton. Councilmember Vice President Palermo, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I was going to add something about this agenda item, and you cut through all the weeds of who the developer was and who was going to pay for it and how long, you take this parcel, and if you've looked at it and you've been there before, I know it's a wooded area. There's times when I've got calls, because this is my district, of camps being in there that shouldn't be in there, weeds, litter. It's a problem for the neighborhood. So it isn't just TIF that makes this project happen. It's about a quality of life in different areas that's changing. And I've heard it because this is my district. So not just this one, but most of these TIF projects, the but for is the quality of life that it changes when you build something in an area that there is nothing in. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Gray.
Yes.
Harding.
Yes.
Melton.
Yes.
Pauls.
Yes.
Palermo.
Yes.
Festerson. Mr. President.
Yes.
Item 11 is approved 7-0. Item 12, a resolution to approve the 24th and Q Streets Southeast Community Redevelopment Area designation.
The public hearing on item 12 begins at this time. Are there any proponents?
Yeah, good afternoon. Don Seaton, Omaha City Planning, on behalf of this item. I appreciate Councilman Gray's comments in particular on how we use TIF to direct development activity, give incentives to certain areas of the city. If you look at the kind of lavender areas on the map here, let me zoom out a bit, excuse me. Those are areas that have been designated as community redevelopment areas, or a CRA. You can only do TIF within an area that's been designated as a CRA. So it's a tool that helps us direct redevelopment activity where we'd like to see that activity take place.
If you could slide the mic with you, please.
Mike? Okay, so for today, we have a request from a developer who would like to have a new area designated as a CRA. It's this area in yellow here, kind of South Omaha. If I swap it out for a little bit clearer view, it's an area pretty much along Q Street and south of Q Street. The developer is looking at doing a senior housing project using low-income housing tax credits. Looking at the southeast corner of 23rd and Q, it's a site that was formerly occupied by the St. Agnes Church. We get the request from the developer and we do an examination of the area. I could go into a great deal of detail on the state criteria, state law criteria for CRA designation, and for the process we use for studying. With all the items on the agenda, I think I'll try to hit the highlights today and keep it brief instead. But anyway, we typically use demographic data and building condition data. And since we're using demographic data, census boundaries work best for us. In this case, the area outlined by yellow, part of which is actually already in a CRA, and part of it which is right next to an existing CRA. That's a census block group. Census block group 1 of Census Tract 28. So we look at the demographic data, we do a field survey of the area to look at building conditions, and we also look at the assessor records for building conditions. And long story short, city planning has found this area to be eligible for CRA designation. It's based primarily on 3 factors. One is building age. Building need to be more than 40 years of age or older on average. Here they're about 79 years of age. By the assessor records, they're actually 120 years of age or older on average. Per capita income of the population within the area is about half that of the city as a whole. Per capita income is $15,000 and the city's is about $30,000. And the third is the building conditions. It's not horribly blighted in the area, but there is some deferred maintenance. It is an older neighborhood with older buildings. You look at the county assessor data, about 41% of the buildings are about fair or a little bit below fair. I would note also that the, excuse me, the prospective developer engaged in community outreach activities. We had a neighborhood meeting on July 16th. We only had one person show up. There were no objections to the proposal. We did notify all the neighborhood associations in the area. Designation of this area has been approved by the Planning Board, the TIF Committee, and we ask for your approval.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents?
Good afternoon, Rob Woodling, Foundations Development, 1886 South 126th Street, Omaha, Nebraska. I'm the developer that approached the planning department about this. I'm looking to do a mixed income affordable housing project. So 80% of our units would be affordable and the other 20% would be market rate for seniors on the southeast corner of 23rd and Q Street on the former site of the St. Agnes Church campus. So I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents? Mr. Seaton.
If I could add just one item. Planning department gets actually quite a number of requests for these studies. We look at them all, at least preliminarily at a staff level. Most of them don't come to you, and because they don't comply with state law. I do want to let you know there's a lot of interest out there, but if it comes in from way out west, typically it doesn't meet the criteria for state law.
Thank you. You can take your overheads. Thank you. Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? The public hearing is closed. Roll call.
Gray. Harding. Melton. Pauls. Palermo. Festerson. Mr. President.
Yes.
Item 12 is approved, 7-0. Item 13, a resolution to approve a special use permit to allow large group living in a CC district for property located at 7215 Ontario Street. Planning Board and Planning Department recommend approval.
The public hearing on item 13 begins at this time. Are there any proponents?
Is this light?
He'll turn it on.
Okay. My name is Kyle Hazy with ENA Consulting Group, 10909 Mill Valley Road, representing the applicant. Along with myself, the applicant representative, John Flanagan, is in the audience as well to answer any questions that I might not be able to answer. The site is located at 7215 Ontario.
Just west of the Burger King?
Just west of the Burger King. So we have the Burger King fast food restaurant here on the east. There's a DoubleTree Hotel that is to the east as well. We have single-family residential across the street on the north, and then multifamily residences on the west. The site is currently zoned CC and is 1.8 acres in size. There is an existing one-story, 19,000 square foot office building on the site. The project that we are discussing is a large group living facility, which is allowed within the CC zoning with an approved special use permit and what we are asking for today. The applicant is North Point Recovery, which serves as a live-in treatment facility for individuals with substance abuse disorders. They provide a voluntary 28-day program. All individuals as part of their program are vetted by staff, and all are there on a volunteer basis. They do not receive any court-ordered individuals, and all the individuals pay privately or through their insurance. The existing building will be renovated to support 22 rooms or 44 beds with dining, exercise rooms, staff offices, and counseling rooms. The exterior of the building will receive new paint. An outdoor patio area will be in the back for patients. And then a sidewalk along Ontario is currently being installed, and then there will be improvements to the parking lot as well. As mentioned before, this is a voluntary program. It involves individuals, group, and family counseling. The facility is staffed 24/7 by staff, including counselors, nurses, and supportive staff. There are programs that also include off-site visits from the group with serving and vans serving as transportation and accompanied by staff. We did have a neighborhood meeting on July 28th at the DoubleTree Hotel and was attended by about 15 of the neighbors. I think we were able to answer most of their questions through them or through that night or through continued coordination and communication with them and with the applicant themselves. This is a very low traffic generator for the neighborhood. Most patients are dropped off by family members or employees, and they do not have their own vehicles on site generally. Family members will come for visitation and family counseling. Otherwise, only employees will be at the site on a daily basis. With that, I'll make myself available for any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents? You can take your overhead sheet. Are there any opponents? The public hearing is closed. second. Roll call.
Gray. Harding. Melton. Pauls. Palermo. Festerson. Mr. President.
Yes.
Item 13 is approved, 7-0. Item 14, an application to consider a Class I liquor license for Mahalo Polk Company located at 6920 Pacific Street, Suite 110. There is a request to postpone this to the October 27th meeting.
We have advertised a public hearing on this, so if anyone came down either as a proponent or opponent who wishes to be heard, you may, but you just heard the motion to lay over. Public hearing is closed. We'll continue the public hearing as a part of the motion. Is that correct?
Correct.
Roll call.
Gray.
Yes.
Harding.
Yes.
Melton. Pauls.
Yes.
Palermo. Festerson. Mr. President.
Yes.
Motion passed, 7-0. Consent agenda. Any member of the city council may cause any item placed on the consent agenda to be removed. Items removed from the consent agenda shall be taken up by the city council immediately following the consent agenda in the order in which they were removed, unless otherwise provided by the city council rules of order.
The public hearing on agenda items 15 and 16 were held on October 6, 2020. Roll call.
Gray. Harding. Melton. Pauls. Palermo. Festerson. Mr. President.
Yes.
Motion passed, 7-0.
We're going to remove items 35 and 36 from the consent agenda. Does anyone wish any other items removed from the consent agenda resolution? Seeing none, the public hearing on agenda items 17 through 34 and 37 through 46 begin at this time. If you wish to address the City Council regarding any of these items, please come to the microphone, indicate the agenda item number you wish to address, identify yourself by your name, address, who you represent, and if you are a proponent or opponent. The public hearing is closed.
Motion to approve items 17 through 34, 37 through 46.
Roll call.
Gray.
Yes.
Harding. Melton. Pauls. Palermo. Festerson. Mr. President.
Yes.
Motion passed, 7-0. Item 35 is a resolution to approve the utility agreement with Unite Private Networks LLC with the city's 100% share of the project costs estimated to be $1,976.72 for the 120th Street improvements from West Maple to Fort Street projects. And I believe there's an amendment.
The public hearing on item 35 begins at this time. Are there any proponents or opponents? The public hearing is closed. Was there an amendment?
An amendment of the whole was distributed, a new resolution with the correction.
Roll call.
Gray.
Yes.
Harding.
Yes.
Melton. Pauls. Palermo. Festerson. Mr. President.
Yes.
Motion passed, 7-0. Item 36 is a resolution to approve the professional services agreement with AECom Technical Services, Inc. with a cost to the city of $41,027.85 for preliminary engineering services on the Signal Operations West Center Road project.
The public hearing on item 36 begins at this time. Are there any proponents or opponents on this item? The public hearing is closed. Roll call.
Gray. Harding. Melton. Pauls. Palermo. Festerson. Mr. President.
Yes.
Motion passed, 7-0. Item 47, a resolution to approve the amendments to the City of Omaha Park rules. A is communications in opposition. B is amendment of the whole requested by the Parks Department.
Before we announce the opening of the public hearing, should let everyone know that came down to perhaps testify on this item that the Parks Committee met to discuss this, and I'd like the Parks Committee Chairman, Mr. Harding, to explain, if he would, the result of the committee's consideration of this and what they're doing today.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we're going to place this on file, or there's going to be a motion to place this on file so that we can go back and further engage stakeholders as we move through this process to amend some of the park rules, thereby getting more buy-in from as I said, the stakeholders, and bring it back through the Parks Committee for further consideration at that time. We thought it made more sense to place this on file rather than just continue to lay it over for periods of time without an end date in sight. So that's a recommendation of the committee, and I would make the motion then to place it on file.
And so before, again, opening the public hearing, if anyone listening or in attendance views yourself as a stakeholder interested in this topic, please reach out to either our city council staff or Mr. Harding, Ms. Melton, or Mr. Festerson on the Parks Committee, or the Parks Department, and let them know of your interest in engaging on these issues so that they can include you in the information dissemination process and give you notice of the meeting so you can participate, and so you can help spread the word to others that you know who may be interested. So having said all of that, I will open the public hearing because we have advertised one. To anyone who wishes to be heard, there is a motion to place on file, which I do expect to pass, but we have advertised a public hearing, and so any proponents or opponents may be heard.
Scott Blake, 2316 North 52nd Street. I'm kind of an opponent-proponent. I think maybe more of an opponent. Let me explain. So, unfortunately, I am still opposed to most of the rules. The wording on line 17 is confusing. I've got a couple of rhetorical questions for the Parks Department to think about. So first, are e-bikes allowed on the trails? Pretty sure the answer is yes. Second, do e-bikes have a motor? So I know the answer is yes to that. So if e-bikes have a motor, and the park rules say no motor-driven devices of any kind, how is a normal person supposed to understand this? Do we expect the average citizen to know the specifics of Nebraska state law, LB 95, which expanded the definition of a bicycle to include e-bikes with an electric motor not bigger than 750 watts? If parks can make a separate rule for winter activities like skiing, hockey, ice fishing, sledding, and snowmobiling, they should probably make separate rules for e-bikes, gas-powered vehicles, and scooters. I think the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit is a step in the right direction, but we've heard complaints specifically about gas-powered vehicles on the trails, and there is no mention of combustion engines in the park rules. Now, I think electric scooters should be allowed on most of the trails in Omaha. I'm fine with banning electric scooters at the skate park, on basketball and tennis courts, and trails like the floating bridge at Standing Bear Lake. I just think it's not safe to have one of those electric scooters over water. The electric scooter's top speed is only 15 miles an hour, and most of the trails are flat, and they're a great way to get around Omaha. And there's a reason you don't see the electric scooters on the Bob Carey pedestrian bridge. Both of the scooter rental companies have exclusion zones that forbid the scooters from riding on the bridge. I even brought a little. So the parks could reach out to Lime and Bird, or the scooter companies, and work on getting these exclusion zones. So there we go. And you can see the Bob Carey pedestrian bridge is already in the exclusion zone. So if you try to ride a scooter over the Bob, it just shuts down. So I actually reached out to Bird and Spin, and they knew nothing about this. So as part of that engagement, I would suggest that parks also reach out to Bird and Spin. Finally, I would like to talk about what the new signs are going to look like. But first, let's look at the old signs. We found these signs installed throughout the city a couple of weeks ago. Sarah Johnson contacted Jake Linder, and they were eventually taken down But how much time and taxpayers' money was wasted on making these signs, installing them, removing them, all before the park's rules were ever approved? I'm still learning how all this works, but the process seems a little bit backwards and inefficient.
Your time has expired.
And I'm glad it's being held over. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, does anyone else wish to testify?
Hi, I'm Julie Harris with Bike Walk Nebraska, 1905 Harney Street, number 401G. I just want to thank you for laying this or putting this on file. I think it's the right move. We can't get the best policy without the right process, and I think we do need to engage the stakeholders, not just the bicyclists, but the runners. Everyone needs to come together and solve this problem. We did it that way when the College World Series moved to downtown and we needed to address the pedicabs. It worked well. Let's do that again and get it right before we move forward. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to testify?
Sarah Johnson, 2316 North 52nd Street. Thanks. Since we rode down here today, I figured we'd say something, but I do think it's the smart move to put it on file. So first of all, just thanks for that. I guess, like Julie said and Scott said, there's kind of a lot of issues, but the big ones are communication, collaboration, and then one thing that kind of stood out to me after our parks meeting is also the word transportation. It was kind of news to me meeting with them a couple weeks ago that they really aren't, it felt like maybe not comfortable calling the trails part of the transportation network, which seems kind of different than what I've heard over the lots of years that we've been all kind of collaborating on making sure that active transportation is a viable way to get around town, including bicycles, since we're all using this today. Part of one of the initiatives that I've been on one of the committees with was the wayfinding signs that went up all over town. The Keystone Trail is part of the sign because it's part of transportation. Here's another one showing how far to the Field Club Trail. Again, these are road signs, so again, assuming it's part of the transportation network. I might just email you this map, but the important thing to note is that the Bike Omaha network, which you can find this map today on the Wellbeing Partners website, which used to be Live Well Omaha, which has been an integral part of all of these conversations over the years. Again, trails are part of the overall transportation network. And so it was a little bit confusing for me to be part of that conversation with the Parks Department a few weeks ago when they're like, oh, it's not transportation, it's recreation. I'm like, oh, shoot, I think it can be both. And I think that's what I'd really like to just make sure that we're all considering as we move forward is for whatever reason it was designed for, may or may not be the same as the way it's being used. And I think it's a both and. Like, I think it's a great asset for our community to have the trails as part of a comprehensive transportation network in addition to access to natural resources and recreation. So just a few other quick things. Speaking of transportation and communication, I went through just quickly the MAPA website, the NRD website, Chamber of Commerce, Bike Walk Nebraska, Wellbeing Partners, just kind of everybody that generally would be involved in these communications when it comes to transportation or active transportation. And again, as I mentioned a few weeks ago, none of them knew about this. So it's good that we're going to talk to everybody. But I pulled just a few quotes off of different websites that kind of back up the feeling that a lot of us do see the trails as part of transportation and not just recreation. Off of the Wellbeing Partners website, they're talking about, again, this Bike Omaha network. And it says, the network enhances navigation and safety while promoting travel by bicycle throughout Omaha. Then I went to the NRD website, and I quote, these trails are an excellent alternative to the use of automobiles and other more traditional methods of transportation. My time's up. I'll turn this in, but you get the point. I got a lot of words, and happy to continue to talk about it as I have been doing for the last decade.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to testify on this item? The public hearing is closed. We have a motion and a second. We have Councilmember Festerson. You're recognized.
President, I also support putting this on file. I think that is a smart thing to do that we discussed in the Parks Committee today. I do want to thank those that came down today and that are helping us work through this. There's no urgency to getting this done, so it's just most important we do it right. And I agree with all the comments we heard here today. I did just want to give some assurance to bike advocates or transportation advocates that have contacted me over this in the last few weeks that I believe there is going to be strong consensus over not banning e-bikes on our trails, rather taking a different approach around speed limits or something of that nature that in fact encourages e-bikes and other kind of transit opportunities throughout our city, which I think is what we should be talking about, not limiting them. And they are right, we do need to do a better job of delineating some of these terms about motorbikes and scooters and how the signs may appear and all those things that would be involved in an effort like this. In addition to that, it's not just those things. There are many other topics that need to get discussed with a little more detail in park rules, such as drones and other items that are in here that are really to the council for the first time. So I think it is smart to put this on file, take our time to do this right. And as almost every speaker said, maybe the main point here is process. We do need to take this through a much better process than has occurred so far. In fact, in our discussions this morning in the Parks Committee, our recommendation, I think, to do would be to have this go back to the mayor's Active Living Advisory Committee for that discussion and for that venue, and probably back to the Parks Committee before it even would come back to the City Council itself. So we are giving folks the chance to chime in and have some meaningful input here. Thanks, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilmember Festerson. And I would just add my suggestion to the Parks Acting Director, Mr. Linder, that I hope you consider public meetings and some open spaces where people who wish to come can participate in a safe way and let you know how important the system is, whether they view it as recreation or for transportation or for other things that you can consider their input. There's a motion, a second. Roll call.
Gray.
Yes.
Harding.
Yes.
Melton.
Yes.
Pauls. Palermo.
Yes.
Festerson. Mr. President.
Yes.
Motion passed 7-0. Item 48, an ordinance approving a contract with Nebraska Land Recycling LLC in the amount of $2,282,800 for the Omaha Mixed Recyclables Processing 2021 to 2030 Package A project. A is communication and support, B is communication and opposition, C is documentation from the Public Works Department, D is traffic analysis.
The public hearing was held September 29. Third reading was laid over from October 6th to today. What's the pleasure of the council? Councilmember Gray, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to, because I won't be supporting this today, and I just wanted to say very quickly what, some of the reasoning is behind that. I think people have known all along that my concern has been about a 10-year contract, as opposed to a 5-year contract. I can't make myself comfortable with a 10-year contract. And so this is nothing against Nebraska Land, nothing in favor of First Star or anybody else. It's just that I'm not comfortable with a 10-year contract at this point, especially with a new company that is being proposed. I would like to see them, how that works out over a period of time before, and I would be willing even to do a 5-year with an automatic 5-year extension if certain protocols were met. But at this point in time, I can't make myself comfortable with a 5-year contract. It has nothing to do with Nebraska Land or anybody else. It's just that based on what I see in the market and the market fluctuations and the game plan that goes on with the oil industry and others, I'm just not comfortable enough that I can do more than 5 years. So I just wanted people to understand what my no vote is going to be. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilmember Gray. Councilmember Festerson, you're recognized.
Thanks, Mr. President. I also want to start out with this one saying I appreciate all the work that has gone into this. I know it's been a long discussion and a long analysis, especially for the Public Works Department. But I would also say I'm just not comfortable with the options we're presented with today. I think we have a current vendor with a lot of experience and a sophisticated operation, but we also have a low bidder that can probably scale up. But I think that is part of the question about a low bid. Do they have the ability to scale up? There are some questions about that and questions about the proximity to a neighborhood that I find a little bit concerning. My main interest all along has always been just that the city demonstrate its long-term commitment to recycling. So in that respect, I do prefer the long-term contract. And it is concerning to me if our options are choose or adopt this contract or have no contract at all, because I think it is important we have a long-term contract that commits the city to doing the right thing, which is to recycle and process these recycling materials in a responsible and efficient way. But at the end of the day, I don't think we should make a decision based on sort of these false limitations or maybe a subpar decision-making process. So I'm a no today as well. I do hope, though, that we consider another bidder or even a rebid process to get where we need to be. And I will hold the administration to their commitment 2 weeks ago, which is regardless of what we do here in terms of a plan B, whether that's a rebid or choose another bidder or approach it from a retail rate perspective for a period of time, that we will not be taking materials to the landfill. That would be an unacceptable outcome for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Festerson. Councilmember Melton, you're recognized.
Well, thank you. And, you know, I've really struggled with this one as well. My problem is I'm not confident that Nebraska Land will be able to fulfill the needs of our city, especially as we go to covered carts and the amount of material that we will be delivering to them on a daily basis. However, by saying no to this contract, we're left without one. I don't get to choose between whether I want Nebraska Land or First Star Fiber. First Star Fiber is not on our agenda today. I don't get to make that decision. And their bid was well over $1.5 million per year. So as a steward of taxpayer dollars, I don't find that to be necessarily acceptable. And I don't know how I could justify that to the hardworking taxpayers of Omaha. If I were to support a bid that was that much higher. And I understand the facility is fabulous. Dale Goebbels and his people are absolutely wonderful at what they do. But again, they were probably where Mr. Brown was, many years ago, and he's trying to get his business going. So today I'm not really making a determination between the two. It's, do I vote for a recycling contract, or do we risk not having a recycling contract at all in the city of Omaha? I am committed to recycling. I recycle in my own house. I recycle in my business. I use the orange bags. My kids do it. My nieces and nephews do it, right? Because we're all taught that we need to care for the environment. We need to care for our earth. And one of the easiest ways we can do that is simply to recycle. All we have to do is put it out on our curb once a week, and somebody comes, takes it away, and recycles everything. So we couldn't make it any easier. But I'm very concerned that we won't have a contract. I don't know that I want to go with a daily bid. I don't know how much that's going to cost. Right now, I understand you could do it daily for maybe $75, but that's not in a contract. So any one of the recyclers could actually start having a bidding war and upping that daily rate to a point where we may not have that in our budget. And I think that would be irresponsible. We do have, Nebraska Land does have a bid bond that they're required to post under the contract. I think at this point in time, I'm going to vote yes on this contract, but I have to say, I'm not necessarily hopeful that we won't, not necessarily hopeful that the traffic and the trucks and the amount of recycling that they're going to be able to handle that, but I hope you can. And I think that would be great, but my fear is not having a contract at all. And this is what's before us. I agree with Councilmember Gray that I would rather see it be 5 years because, but again, that's not what's in front of me today. I would rather see a 5-year contract because just in the last 5 years, the recycling market has changed dramatically, and you don't know what kind of changes that we will see in the future. And with, I know the things that I've seen that First Star is actually going to be doing with the pyrolysis and taking a lot of the recyclable product and turning it into energy, I think that's great. And I'm hoping within the next 5 years that maybe we'll be doing something even different than what we're doing today. So that's why I'm uncomfortable with a 10-year contract. Again, I just don't want to go without a contract. It's too important to the citizens of Omaha that we have a recycling contract. And this is the one that the mayor has chosen. And it also is the one that is best for the taxpayers of the city of Omaha. So for that reason, I'll be supporting it. If this doesn't pass, though, I would say I would be more comfortable with a 5-year, so I hope we do get a contract back in front of us, at least the 5-year one, because that would be my preference. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Melton. Councilmember Pauls, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, as I reflect, I wonder if the founders of First National Bank, TD Ameritrade, Mutual of Omaha, Valmont, ConAgra, I wonder when they first started out, oh, that's right, they're big companies now. But they started out, I'm assuming relatively small. Go down sometime by the First National Bank when you see all the statuettes down there and read some of the words that are written down there. I've always been an advocate for the small guy. In fact, I was the advocate for the small guy from Minnesota. I still am. To me, the American way is to give that person who has the drive and the ability, as I've been told by a number of people from the city, to fulfill the contract. I find it ironic. On all my years, basically 16 years in the political arena, I always found out if you're a big company and you have pretty good attorneys, you're one step up above that small guy. I've noticed it all the time. So what I'm going to suggest, all you people who start in small companies, start big and hire some very good attorneys. Because the world has sort of set it up. You know this. We know this. I believe the American way says give the small guy, or not guy, but the small company a chance to prove themselves. And that's why I think supporting an up-and-coming company who does quite a bit of business the way it is, I think I will give that person, I'll do it the American way. Give what I call that underdog a better chance. Pretty corny, but you know, makes me think of when I used to sit down with my mother and my dad. They had so much common sense. Could they compete against the big companies? No. But they usually did the right thing. So that's where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Pauls. Council Vice President Palermo, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's always tough to follow Councilmember Pauls, but I'll try. So I wanted to thank both of the companies who were here today, First Star, Nebraska Land. I visited both sites. I think as the process works for recycling, I'm not going to make it very technical. I showed up to both sites. I was greeted. I got the tour, and it was pretty simple. I want to see where it lands from the delivery to where it comes out of the machine and it's got the wire band around it. And that's what I seen. The companies are different, but the process is the same. What we have in front of us, as you heard, is a contract for 10 years with Nebraska Land. But it didn't start recently. I've been part of the Public Works Committee for 4 years, the last 2 as the chair of Public Works. So we've been talking about this process of solid waste and carts and recycling for 4 years that I know of. So besides the companies that are here taking the questions and the process of city bids in, thank you for being here and being a part of that. But Public Works has truly put in the work on this process. They have vetted, they have dug into the details, they have taken previous contracts, they have did their part to bring us a recommendation. And it's not just by Public Works, it's also by Finance, who has vetted and done their part of the process to make sure it happens. And then, of course, it gets sent to us by the mayor. So that's what we have in front of us. And the reason I say it started 4 years ago, because recycling is the last piece of the puzzle. I've always said, along with Select and FCC, that I would not let recycling die on my watch. And when you don't have a contract in front of you, that's a possibility. You truly do jeopardize recycling. And you can say you don't, but that's what happens if, and I know it's been said as well, we'll just go retail and we'll decide where we're gonna take it. It's not retail, it's pay as you go. And hopefully the facilities you would take this material to would still accept it. They would still be willing to honor their price. And hopefully they would actually recycle. They don't have to. These are private businesses if we go retail. So there's a true worry from me that if we don't have a contract in place, we don't put the last part of this puzzle piece together. So I've gotten the letters from many different groups. I've had various phone calls from my constituents, obviously in the area of Nebraska land. I've walked the neighborhood. Believe it or not, a large majority of them are like, oh, the site down the road, great. Are they gonna pick up my stuff? When does it start? Because as we talked about solid waste, it's important. You put it on the curb, you get it picked up, and you don't wanna drag it back at the end of the day. Recycling now is going to be even a little better. Every couple weeks, bigger cart, covered. It's the same principle. You wanna fill the can, you want it picked up, and you wanna drag it back and fill it for the next go around. That's what recycling is. You pick it up, you process it, you sell it down the road. Without a contract in place, I don't know that it's that simple. I do worry about the 10-year because we know there's fluctuation in the market, but that's not what's in front of me. What's in front of me is a contract for Nebraska land to make sure we have the possibility to recycle in this town, which is very important to many of us. And I'm not gonna get into the details of the different companies, of who has more covered area, the working conditions. It's recycling, it's work. I mean, if you work out in the field, just like we ask city employees to do daily, there's hazardous conditions. They're in the elements. It's never beautiful weather, especially here in Nebraska. This is what you do. And these facilities are open and they're work. So the contract in front of me is important to finalize what we've been working on, and I will be approving it. If it moves forward, then it moves forward. If not, we'll go back to the drawing board. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Harding, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too, actually, I'll repeat probably what's been said from others, but I think it's important to do exactly that. What we have before us is what has been recommended by the administration. We don't have the ability to deny this and pull another option onto the table to take that for approval. Kind of interestingly enough, last night I was asked by our assistant planning director to come and speak to his son's Boy Scout pack, and we talked a lot about recycling and talked about the importance of having a robust and effective recycling contract with the city for the citizens, so that we could be better stewards to you know, the environment. And told the group that, you know, this is an issue that we're going to be actually voting on today. So I wanted to reemphasize as well to those here and those watching that it is important for the city of Omaha to have a robust and effective recycling program. And I think you hear among all of us, the 7 of us, that we all want the same thing. I think we just all have differing opinions of what the best way to get there. what the best program is. So, and we've all done, I think, our homework and our due diligence, as I know the Public Works Department and the administration has done. But we can all take that same data, that same information, and process it through our filters and come up with different solutions or different answers. So I want to thank Lance and Jim Tyler, who took me through their facility as well. I wanted to make sure that I had that, that part of the input in my decision-making process to be able to analyze. I do have a number of questions about the ability for Nebraska land to perform. But saying that, I also understand the importance, as others have brought up, about the importance of having a contract in place. So before I kind of go any further, I wanted to ask the city attorney a couple questions, if you wouldn't mind, Paul. So if, we'll have to play out a couple of hypotheticals here in some different scenarios, but if this is not approved today, the 10-year agreement is not approved today, and there may be a scenario which I think was at least touched upon by the mayor's chief of staff a couple weeks ago, that maybe in absence of a contract, that we would do a pay-as-you-go, as council member Palermo said, a pay-as-you-go or a daily rate. How would that be paid for? What processes would have to be approved through either the city council or not in order to do that? Because I know we have a budget for recycling, but it's the way that's wrapped into this agreement. But if we didn't approve this agreement, and as the seven of us, and I know the mayor, all want to have that robust recycling capability for the city, how would you go about paying for that?
Paul Kratz, City Attorney. That would be difficult in the fact that under the our home rule charter and the ordinances, the administration can spend up to $20,000 without coming back to the City Council for approval. So if you're going to go on a long-term basis, a year, half a year, whatever, doing the daily rate, at some point you'd have to be back here to get approval. Otherwise, the administration will be limited to $20,000.
So, and then if there were a contractual agreement that needed to be made between, is there a possibility for the council then to have a contractual agreement that it would consider for a period of time less than a year?
That would have to come through the mayor's office,
okay,
as all contracts do.
Right.
But yeah, you certainly could develop a contract with some other entity to do that.
As a quick aside, that was one of the things we talked about at Mr. England's son's event last night, is we talked about the form of government we have here in Omaha. It's basically what's commonly referred to as a strong mayor, weak city council arrangement, where the mayor proposes, the city council disposes, which is basically what you just illustrated there. Okay, so again, so now I want to go back to the importance of having that agreement, and I think I think Councilmember Gray and I would agree that maybe the shorter term option, which again is not what we have today, but the shorter term option that was responded to in the RFB, I would probably prefer the 5-year contract going with Nebraska land if that were the direction. But again, that's not what we have to vote on today. So what we will be voting on again is the 10-year with Nebraska land. I also had some questions as it relates to traffic. We went over those, I think, in previous discussions as well as this morning at pre-council. I'm concerned about the number of trucks that hit the facility probably in a concentrated period of time in the afternoon, what that impact is not only to the neighborhood, but to the facility itself and being able to process that. That there are still details that we don't have necessarily in front of us to consider as it relates to the flow of traffic, if you will, through the facility itself, with if it's a one scale system, if it's a two scale system, how much of the apron, if you will, actually gets opened up enough for additional materials to be dumped from the trucks that enter while they're being processed with the skid loaders to move it about and into the actual kind of conveyor belt process that it would go through. So I want to have the ability to have that contractual arrangement and not on the day-to-day or pay-as-you-go kind of what might be an option or what's been at least floated as a possible option. I think it's important to have that contractual agreement, and therefore, with some confidence, knowing that the Public Works and the administration and their, I guess, comfort level, knowing that they can continue to work maybe to get it to that point. Again, I would rather, for that reason, prefer the 5-year agreement as well as prefer a 5-year agreement for all the changes that that might occur in this this recycling process moving forward. 2 other quick points, and then I'll close up. One, I would truly have wished to have seen an option in this RFB be just pay the flat rate of a daily rate, if you will, but contracted daily rate, and not have the city share in the revenue of the processing of the materials. The reason there's a difference between what's kind of been floated as maybe a $75 flat rate or daily rate compared to what we're considering, which is about $114, $115, is, for those who are watching to understand, is that delta is really what the contract or the respondent has to build into their pricing, because that's the revenue share of the recycled materials that get sold on the markets that the city then gets back as, I'll say, a refund, whatever the term might be. But as we are good stewards of taxpayers' dollars, I think it makes more sense for us to budget that as a constant and not have the city playing the recyclable markets and how it goes up and down and fluctuates over time, because currently we're not receiving any of those revenues. So that would be a downtime for us. Again, I just think it would have been a nice option to have as again, stewards of taxpayers' money. It would have been a good option to have to consider for budgeting purposes, having that constant over time. The last point I was going to make too is that all my comments today have nothing to do with the ability of First Star to perform, nor the service they have provided to the city over the years. I think they've done a spectacular job, and they're a fantastic company. They are not what we are voting on today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Pauls, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Could I have somebody from the public, Jim, can I have you come down? I just have a question about the bids and the information that you gave.
Mr. Tyler, welcome.
Jim Tyler, City of Omaha Public Works.
Jim, I'm reading off of the sheet that you gave, and I'm just going to use the first one, 20,000 tons Nebraska land. And how much would that cost?
So this, you're talking about this sheet. Do you want me to put it on the?
Yes, put that on, yes. And I'll just start with the 20,000 at the very top. Okay, Nebraska land, what does the 2 million plus, what does that tell me?
So this is the price. This is the bid price. It's not reflective of any rebates that would happen according to the market share. And there's other information that I provide you reflective of that. But what this is intended to show is the difference between the two bids. So, and I'll try to move this over. So over a 10-year contract, what you would see between the bid price from Nebraska land and the bid price from First Star on the price per 20,000 tons, that the difference over the length of the contract would be that $12.72 million. And so what you see is you're not seeing an actual price. That's the bid price, not including the rebate, but that constant difference between the two doesn't change.
Okay.
So no matter what the rebate is, that constant stays the same.
Okay, well, I'm gonna get back to the first column. The 2,282,000, that's without a rebate. And
Correct.
so if we get a rebate, that would go down?
That would go down.
Okay, so, and as we go down, I'm not gonna have you go through each, the different amount of tonnage that's been processed. So we're talking about $2 million plus, remove the, eventually there will be a rebate.
Yes.
And what I want to talk to the public about, we spent a lot of time on this because we're trying to get to the best bid. Well, I'm going to challenge you on a regular basis. If you go through our consent agenda, there are times that we spend more than that on this one topic for 1 year, and we will pass it on our consent without hardly any discussion. Just go back through the several weeks or months, and you will see that there are other agenda items that we don't even spend close to the amount of time we have on this. If we're concerned about the tax dollar, and these are legit expenditures, I'm not saying they're not legitimate. They are, because we do get a product out of it. But it's interesting how we're spending on this project, and when it comes to other ones that are on our consent agenda, because you today, well, there's one that I talked about this morning, 25, $1,782,000. A legit project, but did you hear any discussion on that today? So I think we have to put a balance on this. I know these are taxpayer dollars, but these are taxpayer dollars on this sheet that we do very little talking about on a regular basis. I truly believe if Jim and his team have vetted this company and saying this is the value that we're going to get, we do have to have, even though at times I disagree with them on other projects, I do know there's been an effort to save the taxpayers' dollars. I just find it interesting how we will spend so much time, and there will be so much talk, which I am doing right now, to express to the people, I'm going to save your tax dollars. Very little on other topics. Consistently, this is not a one-day thing. This is why I'm frustrated sometimes. And we talked earlier about that that the way this system is set up, it is a mayor-dominated system, which it rightly should be, because that's what is in the charter. And we can't do something different unless the mayor does provide that for us. We can vote this down, or we can hopefully, well, I'm hoping it passes, then we'll put it to bed for a while. If not, she will have to come back with a different proposal at another time. I'll get off my stand on this issue, but I just think I hear so much talk, and if we're going to be honest about it, we got to talk about taxpayer dollars on all topics. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Pauls. Vice President Palermo, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, I wanted to add something too that I didn't put in there before as I toured the facilities. Obviously, the neighborhood is very important, and I listened to the constituents, but overwhelmingly it was, no, we need to recycle. We'll make it work. And there's one part of this when you visit a site, and if you have any part of your mind that tells you, can this contract be done by a certain company? It was when I visited Nebraska land, and as we took the tour and we stopped towards the end, and I remember asking Mr. Brown, there was an employee there, and both of these facilities, if you haven't seen them, then it's unbelievable. I mean, there's walls with stacks of cans. There's another wall with a stack of milk jugs, which I learned are gold. And I think that's where the employee was along this line as the recyclables were pushed in up the conveyor, this way, that way, sorted out. And I had asked Mr. Brown, I said, so, you know, you don't have as many employees. Your facility, although the covered area is bigger, your facility overall isn't as big. You need to work on picking up litter. But tell me, like, you know, worker to worker, as he's standing there and not as he's dressed today in shorts and a t-shirt. And I said, what if this employee, and I pointed to the employee right there, doesn't show up to work? And he said, well, then me or one of my owners would hop in there and do that job. This is what we do. We will make this work because this is how the process works. We get in there and we do the job. And I think that was the turning point when you're sitting there even on if it can be accomplished or not, when you hear a business owner say, no, this is what I do and this is what I'll do to make it happen. So yes, there's the big part of saving money. Councilmember Pauls is always right when he talks about us just stamping stuff that we approve much more than the savings of this and don't even have discussion. But back on this, the reason I believe and the reason I know from hearing from my constituents that recycling is important enough is that I seen it with my own eyes from the owner that this contract will be fulfilled. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Gray, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, I'm not changing my mind. I'm concerned about the 5 versus the 10 years. It didn't matter to me which company. It didn't even matter to me so much the cost, because I think recycling is extremely important and something we need to do. And the cost, you know, we look at the cost in dollars and cents and saving to the taxpayers and so forth, but the environment is what's more important to me in terms of making sure that we are recycling. The 5-year contract, and part of the reason for that is I've been around a little bit, and there was a company prior to First Star that had the same kind of issues in its first 4 or 5 years. First Star had issues in the first 4 or 5 years in relationship with the company that eventually turned around. I don't see that being any different with Nebraska land, but I guess I just have to say that the 10 versus the 5 years is really what's, you know, driving my decision not to be supportive of this time, because I've seen too often where in that first 5 or 6 or 7 years, there are a lot of changes. There are a number of unexpected things that happen from time to time, you know, that we just didn't account for in the bid process. Whether we did or we didn't in this process, I'm not really sure. I'm hoping that we did, but you know, for me, you know, I just, like I said before, I can't get, because of the volatility of the market, because of things that have been done that have been questionable at the national level. My concerns about recycling still don't change, and the 5-year contract versus the 10 still don't change. So I'm still going to be voting no on this. If it passes, I wish Nebraska land a lot of luck. And I'll be supportive in any way that I can. But, you know, in terms of the 5 versus 10 years, I'm not going to move off of the fact that I think there needs to be a 5-year contract as opposed to a 10. And even though I know it's not here, I'm hoping that we can renegotiate something, but I'm just not comfortable with 10 years. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mike, I won't repeat what I said on the 6th, that I had a lot of concerns regarding the abilities of this proposed contractor, Nebraska Land, to perform and meet and or exceed the expectations in the contract. And I've talked about those at some length. I'll give Mr. Brown a tip of the cap. He's a very confident spokesperson for your company. And maybe in time you will prove my concerns wrong, and I'd like nothing more than to see you do that. And in terms of the last time we met, there were some questions that had not been addressed, and so we have answers for those who have been following along. And one is, it goes to the concern that many have about, can this location work and function adequately in a safe manner and handling the traffic and volume? And that was another concern I had, that I didn't think it could. And in the interim, between when we last met today, I have learned that the numbers of trucks per day estimated by Public Works to arrive at the Nebraska Land location would actually be much more, because they did not include in their estimate the number of trucks that are delivering recyclable goods from the city's drop-off locations around town. And so I asked, well, what does that mean? And from Public Works perspective, and talking to the new contractor, they estimated that it would be 7 to 10 more trucks per day. Then I asked our current processor, First Star, what is your actual experience per day? And what they see in drop-off for vehicle traffic on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays is actually 25 trucks per day from those drop-off sites. So we won't have 25 trucks per day going to D Street to Nebraska Land if they get the contract. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, we'll have 50. And on Tuesdays and Thursdays, it's about 15 trucks per day from those drop-off sites. And so that's a lot of vehicle traffic. It's a lot of traffic to be going in and out of a little facility, dropping off goods, materials to be sorted at a relatively small site. It's a lot of vehicular conflicts and movements. And that brought me to the other unanswered question, and that was, how did this second driveway appear on D Street at Nebraska Land's location? And there was no answer to whether they applied for a permit, which I thought was odd, because I've had a lot of constituents who have told me about their frustrations about Public Works curb cut regulations, and how they really take an aggressive approach about screening what additional driveways they authorize, because they're concerned about traffic coming in and out of streets and making sure it's done in an orderly way and controlled access points. And so we learned that this particular Nebraska Land site did not get a permit for the new driveway they put in. And so they have a right to appeal, I think it's to the Administrative Board of Appeals, to waive that rule. I don't know what position Public Works would take. At the pre-council meeting, they said, had Nebraska Land come to the city, they would have worked with Nebraska Land at redesigning their ingress and egress into one larger driveway that could handle the traffic in and out. But in this case, they have two smaller ones, which, even if they win their appeal, that to me causes more issues in terms of how vehicles are going to move, because it just wouldn't flow with who our own traffic engineers, who have expertise in this area, have shared with us it works. So I asked Mr. Brown this morning, just putting aside the capacity issues in terms of your company's ability to grow so fast to be able to adequately handle the volume of what's coming your way if you get this contract. Are you married to this location? And never really got an answer other than he feels he can make it work at this site, which I think goes to the exuberance you have as a still young businessman who's building a hopefully successful company. So I couldn't personally overcome my own concerns, notwithstanding the nice job you do on behalf of representing your company. At this time, as important as my constituents tell me recycling is in terms of District 3, as I've heard from everyone else here today, as shared in their districts by their constituents. The unusual thing for me with my constituents is they've echoed the same concerns about whether Nebraska land could perform. And to them, they'd rather not see me vote to approve this contract and risk setting the very vibrancy and vitality of our recycling program as a city as a whole in peril than to take a step back and vote no, which would allow Public Works the opportunity to reevaluate the whole thing. And if for a time that means the mayor is going to do as she has said she will and do a daily drop-off at Nebraska land at the D Street location. Mr. Kratz has told us, as you heard, that that's okay for a period of time. So if the new contract starts at the end of November and they decide that they're still evaluating this as to what the long-term position of the administration is, we'll see how you do in the interim if that's what the Public Works and the mayor decide to do in terms of these daily drop-offs at Nebraska land. But it'll hopefully allow a rethinking in terms of the things that you heard from council members today on this matter. And because I think in many ways, there's a lot of agreement among the 7 in what I heard said today. And so hopefully the administration feels the same way. I'm not going to continue talking. I think there's a motion. There's no motion. Is there a second? Second. No further lights? As proposed.
As proposed.
Roll call.
Gray.
No.
Harding. Melton.
Yes.
Pauls. Palermo.
Yes.
Festerson. Mr. President.
No.
Motion failed 3-4. One public hearing can be held for items 49 to 52 relating to the transit-oriented development. Planning Board and Planning Department recommend approval. B is transit-oriented development sub-district map. C is communications and support. D is communications and opposition. Item 49 is an ordinance to amend various sections of Chapter 55 of the Omaha Municipal Code. Items 50 to 52 are amendments to the urban design element, land use element, and transportation element of the Omaha Master Plan.
There will be one public hearing on items 49 through 52, but before we open the public hearing to members of the public for comment, I'd like the planning director and his team to make an opportunity to have an initial presentation.
Sure.
Mr. Fanslaw, welcome.
Thank you. Dave Fanslaw, City Planning Director, City of Omaha, 1819 Farnham. Thanks for the opportunity today, council members. As a lot of you know, if not all of you know, this has been a few years in the making. A lot of hard work has gone into this process by a lot of different people. So I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present today. I'd also in particular like to thank our current council planning committee members and one former council planning committee member. You 3 or 4 people are really have been supportive of this effort, and I appreciate that a lot. So, and you know quite a bit about it. So I'm going to be real sort of brief, and then I'm going to let some of my team get into the specifics about the code and some of the master plan changes. But item 49 is there's a large list of code amendments, Chapter 55 text amendments that we are proposing. A lot of it has to do with TOD, as you know, and we'll get into those specifics. But there's also some other text amendments in the code that I want to talk about. So TOD, we have a provision to add accessory dwelling units or to change the way we handle accessory dwelling units in our code. It's currently in our code now. Kind of cumbersome, not real workable. We think we think what we're proposing today is better than what is in the code for a number of years that is rarely used. We have some amendments to our mixed-use zoning for you council members who asked us to take a look at a few things, in particular convenience storage. We heard you. We took a look, and we think what we're proposing is workable for those in that industry and for us to keep managing those mixed-use centers going forward. We have a change in the code for the way we handle office in those mixed-use centers as well, which sometimes is a little hard to fit in. There's a 10% requirement in every mixed-use district. But we've got some different ways we think we can handle that based on what we've seen from the market since our master plan was adopted. We also have some site development regulations changes for for some of our residential districts that we think make sense to promote different types of housing, promote different type of site development regulations that could bring some different products to Omaha. We have some parking, some difference in parking, storm shelters, and the way we handle some landscape bonds. So the reason why I bring all those up is because as we work with the zoning code every day and meet with a lot of people every week, we notice things in the zoning code that could be tweaked, could be changed. Our zoning code, as you know, is quite old from when it was adopted, but we've made numerous changes to that code along the way. Every time we change or propose to make a change to the zoning code, we're required to notify every neighborhood district and association. That can get kind of cumbersome if we find one change and then notify everybody and go through a process and then repeat that. So what we do is we kind of wait until we get a good pool of amendments that need to come forward. We do it all at one time. So it helps us working with those neighborhood groups and with the advertising. So I've kind of gone through the code. There's a lot of people to thank, and I'll try to be brief. This process started 4 or 5 years ago when we received a technical assistance grant from Smart Growth America that talked about the TOD. Obviously, it's our TOD. What we're proposing for TOD zoning is closely linked to the BRT that's going to start operation, I believe, November 18th of this year. So we've been working at this for a long time. I appreciate staff. These 3 people who will talk, we've had other people on staff who have worked on this as well. We've had a lot of good conversations, internal conversations, a lot of debate, some disagreement, but in the end we came together and we think we're put together and putting forward a very good product for you all to consider. Stakeholder groups, the stakeholder group that was put together was neighborhood representatives, developers, designers, and other interested community leaders. We put together an action team from members of the Planning Department, the Public Works Department, the Mayor's Office, Metro Area Transit, MAPA, and the Chamber of Commerce. So quite a big outreach for those committee members and that stakeholder group. I think it's real important to talk about, or at least mention, the public engagement. I think Derek's going to talk about quite a bit about that. But you know, this isn't something that we cooked up in the 11th floor and held it close or just talked to you folks about in the administration about. We had dozens of neighborhood meetings with a lot of different neighborhood groups, took what they said back to our office, worked on some things, went back out and engaged them. So it was a pretty good model for our public engagement on this process, and I think we did an outstanding job, and I think the product that you see today in front of you has a lot to do with that public engagement that we did. So again, we're here to talk about items 49 to 52. I will sit down. I believe Derek is first. He's going to have a presentation on the TOD. Thank you, and I'll be here for any questions.
Thank you. Derek Miller, City Planning. While he's setting up, I'll tell everyone I once introduced Mr. Miller to one of my daughters several years ago. I said, "Well, explain what you do." He said, "I work on things in my lifetime that I hope will benefit those who come years after me." So, welcome, Mr. Miller. You ready?
So, TOD, Dave kind of touched on the process a little bit, but we've been working on this for quite some time, ever since the Metro Transit was awarded the Tiger Grant for the Orbit project. But officially, this project process began about 2 years ago. Over that process, over that time, over those 2 years, we had 13 public meetings, 13 stakeholder meetings, a half a dozen action team meetings, which is Planning Department, Public Works, and all of our partners, Metro Transit, MAPPA, and the Chamber of Commerce. In addition to those public meetings, we held probably a half a dozen to a dozen targeted neighborhood meetings. So Dundee Memorial Park Neighborhood Association met with them a few times. Field Club or Fair Acres met with them a few times to gather all the input that we needed to gather. The other thing we did in May and June, we held an open comment period on the proposed amendments. During that time, we received over 2,200 comments, and I went through every one of those comments. Not fun, but went over all those comments, and I would say about 95 or more than 95% of those comments that we received that were substantial or substantive, we incorporated those changes or those recommendations into the amendments that you see today. Really what TOD is, it's a type of development that improves the pedestrian environment. You could read the rest of those bullet points, but really greater density and that pedestrian environment, because anyone that rides transit arrives to and leaves from transit on foot, so as a pedestrian. And how is this different than our zoning that we have today that was adopted in 1987, as Director Vanslaw stated? We've made a bunch of changes, but TOD zoning is a type of form-based code. So our traditional zoning, again, very suburban type of zoning, really focuses on the use, separating uses out, where TOD, the form-based, really looks at the form. And the second bullet point there, really the physical character of the buildings and the relationship of those buildings to each other and to the street. So a lot of the projects that have been happening in our urban core and near our urban core have gone through our PUR process, our Planned Unit Redevelopment process. And this is, we've taken a lot of information from that process, urban design, zoning, and developed these zoning tools to create a better environment. The change that you see in the three different elements is really a change to our future land use. The area you see in orange, Orbit orange, similar to what Orbit, their color scheme is, along Dodge Street, basically from 10th to the West Roads, a half mile on either side. It also incorporates the downtown Metro Mixed Use Center. So through the public engagement process and those neighborhood meetings, we identified generally the half mile on either side of Dodge, and then took into account different thoughts and different ideas and different public engagement, and settled on this area. It has been modified a little bit since our July proposal, but is substantially the same. And really what the amendments, the zoning amendments for TOD, we're adding 6 zoning districts, 3 mixed use and 3 residential. And when we get into the TOD 1, 2, 3, and 4, we're really trying to locate the most dense projects near the transit stations and along the corridor, and it should taper off into the neighborhoods from there. Along this process, and probably the most talked about map in the planning department probably for the last 10 years, is the sub-district land use map. And this was also developed with our stakeholder committee, our action team, internally within the planning department. And this will guide our implementation of the new TOD zoning as a type of zoning district that we would recommend as a department.
And really, how we developed this map is really based upon proximity to the transit stops, a lot of research on the existing land use and zoning rights that property owners have today, existing street types, public engagement through neighborhood surveys. Again, back to that other image that I just showed, transition of scale from those transit stations into the neighborhood. And then there are certain areas that are along the corridor that are historic in nature and have low-density residential zoning existing today, and those areas were removed. So with all those 6 criteria together, we developed this map, which will guide us in the next 10, 20 years in implementing the TOD zoning. And the last thing I'll touch upon, Director Vansell talked about this, accessory dwelling units. It's a form of gentle density. We know from experience that our existing regulations don't allow these. It's very cumbersome. We heard a lot of positive comments from the public during our process that this is something that we should do, and even heard from some that we should do this all over the community because it's a way of adding housing, but not, or adding housing within existing neighborhoods. Some really excited, so much so that they were surprised that their existing accessory dwelling unit on their property is illegal today. We know of quite a few of those within our community. We made it this regulation to allow ADUs much easier within the TOD area, and maybe someday in the future it'll be allowed in other areas, but we wanted to see how it would work existing today within that half-mile TOD area. With that, that's my last slide, and I think I'll pass it over to Mr. Moulton, and he'll talk about some of the other amendments that are proposed.
Thanks, Derek. Jed Moulton, Planning Department. In addition to some of the text amendments presented today, there's some revisions to our mixed-use zoning and our urban design zoning. As you know, mixed-use zoning regulates most of the commercial development in western portions of the city. It is originally intended to provide a mixture of compatible uses in a pedestrian-oriented format that also accommodates vehicles. Over the years, we evaluate the effectiveness of the zoning. We speak with developers and engineers, and we try to modify it to adapt to market trends and changes in the market, and also to make it more effective and produce more tangible outcomes. I'm happy to present that some of the changes we're making today, I think, will really add an improvement. Some key and notable modifications are how we integrate office uses into mixed-use centers. As you may know, there's a requirement to have a compatible mixture of uses, and currently it's 10% of the area should be devoted towards office. We've considering changes in market and demand, we've also seen a real spike in the need for multifamily and interested to be incorporated into mixed-use centers. So we've provided some flexibility that allows the office use to be exchanged for residential use and, as an option. We're finding that the office uses currently aren't as strong as they once were 12 or 15 years ago when the code was written, so we have another option there. We've also provided a limitation on convenience storage. The intent is that these districts provide local services and amenities to neighborhoods. While convenience storage is somewhat benign, we feel that in the smaller districts it displaces what would otherwise be a more tangible service, a restaurant or an office or some retail to the neighborhood. So we've limited convenience storage to take up no more than 10% of a mixed-use district, with the caveat that currently the requirement is that they are no less than 2 acres. So that would mean they could only occur in mixed-use districts that are 20 acres or greater. We've also made provisions for, as I mentioned previously, the influx of multifamily housing into mixed-use districts. Currently, there wasn't much of a demand for that. We've clarified the expectation that they too be designed in a pedestrian-oriented format, much like all the other commercial retail is expected to do so in the mixed-use areas. And lastly, we've addressed the pedestrian open space and plaza requirement, where previously it was perceived that it was a little bit too prescriptive because each center is different, and not every center can be Exarban Village or Midtown Crossing, which are heavily pedestrian oriented. Some of them thematically are more office oriented. Some of them are more large box retail oriented. So we've provided a flexible format for pedestrian amenities that can be a wide range of features rather than one specific configuration, which was previously drafted. That sums up, I think, the changes to mixed use. Additionally, there's some amendments to the urban design, Article 22, which are primarily editorial in nature because it serves as a central segment of the code that other sections refer to. So the TOD code refers to our urban design requirements. The mixed use code refers to Article 22 as well. So we've coordinated and made necessary amendments to that section of the code to accommodate these other revisions. With that, I'm here to answer any questions for you.
Thank you, Mr. Moulton. Mr. England.
Eric England, Omaha Planning Department, President, members of the council, thank you for letting us speak. I'm going to kind of summarize the remaining changes and go through them rather quickly. Along with the TOD and the mixed-use changes, we are proposing minimum bicycle parking in those two areas. So similar to how we have vehicular minimum parking requirements, in TOD and mixed-use specifically, we are adding a component that would require minimum bike parking, both short-term and long-term. So if you have a multifamily project, long-term bicycle would be maybe an enclosed facility within the apartment complex that allows for long-term storage for the residents who live there. Some components of that is like small repairs, the tools that are available. So this is more common in the infill projects and redevelopment that we've seen in downtown and midtown areas. So we think that's a great benefit. We compared 15 similar sized cities for what their bicycle requirements are, as well as just looking throughout the city at the different uses. And we think that's a great added benefit. Regarding the changes to the R5 through R8 district site development regulations, we've heard from some developers over the past few years trying to maximize, with the high costs of building materials and infrastructure that is needed for development, how can they maximize the infrastructure that is being put in place. So part of the amendment would be to allow a 40-foot lot width in the R5 and R6 zoning district, as well as a 4,000 square foot building lot. Now, this does not increase the amount of units per acre that would be allowed. We already allow smaller townhomes and duplexes within those districts, but this would be for single-family detached homes. Along with that, there's a small increase in the building and impervious coverages by 5% to allow that slightly smaller lot to be able to incorporate those single-family homes. Along with that, we are proposing a reduction in the front yard setback for low-density housing, so single-family, townhomes, duplexes, in the R6, R7, and R8 districts from 35 feet to 25 feet. 25 feet is consistent already in place for R4 and R5. We thought in those areas it's just a small change. It probably won't be utilized very much, but it would make the code more consistent. Two last items to the landscape bond. This is just a small section of the code that allows those taking out building permits. So in the winter months when they're not able to plant, you're able to take out a landscape bond. Right now, we don't have any limit on the duration. Well, the intention is when the weather is cold and you can't do those landscape plantings, that's the intention of the landscape bond. So rather than having it year-round and just delaying the plantings, we're now restricting that to the winter months. And then the last item would be for storm shelters. In 2018, with the updated building code amendments, storm shelters are accounted for in that building code. The zoning code, we did not want it to be redundant or conflicting, so now it just refers to the requirements of the most up-to-date building code. So that is everything that we have. I know it's a lot of material, a lot of changes. I just want to reiterate one thing on the transit-oriented development. This will be an entirely opt-in, a request to rezone. We're not rezoning anybody's property. We are amending the zoning code to allow for different types of development to incorporate what we've done for several years with the PUR tool. We're incorporating those same concepts and adding and expanding on all of those great features with transparency, building requirements, and now we're putting it into this area everywhere. Well, let me go back to sub-district map. Everywhere in the color would be eligible for TOD zoning, but it needs to go through an application to the planning department for a rezoning to one of those districts, which would go to the planning board and then come before city council. So I just wanted to reiterate that. We're not changing anybody's zoning. We're just setting up the tools to allow for the development to occur. So with that said, I know there's a lot of materials. We're all here for questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you. If you could shut that off, we'll open the public hearing now for proponents. Those wishing to speak in favor of any one of these items.
Will Green, 3018 South 33rd Street. So I help lead the Omaha Missing Middle Housing Campaign. We're a coalition of organizations and grassroots volunteers supporting improvements to Omaha's zoning code to encourage walkable, transit-viable infill housing. Omaha's land use policies should complement Omaha's priorities, which include the creation of world-class public transit system, business attraction, and social and economic diversity in our neighborhoods. Unfortunately, our current zoning code established in the 1980s does not. We do support the TOD transit-oriented development policy and related ordinances, especially the site development regulation improvements in agenda items 49 through 52. We do think they represent a small but important step towards correcting these wrongs, and we hope the ordinance do spur further momentum and look forward to helping working with staff and city leadership to chart that future, and definitely appreciate all the hard work of the planning department and the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Next proponent.
Good afternoon. Holly Barrett, Omaha Downtown Improvement District, 1640 Dodge Street, Suite 140. My organization, the Downtown Improvement District, clearly the new master plan would cover a huge chunk of our district. And so we were both a stakeholder, and then I am also a private resident, so I was also able to be a part of the public outreach process as a private person. Huge kudos to the team. Derek has been working on this for years and years with everyone else, and it was really a fantastic process to see how much time and effort they really put into it, both with stakeholders all over the city and then with specific folks right there in the area. So that was really a fantastic thing to be a part of. My organization, the Improvement District, is focused on the pedestrian environment first and foremost, while we do a whole lot of other things. Really what we want to make sure is that people are enjoying the public realm and that it is vibrant, safe, and clean. We fully believe that the amendments that we're asking for here that would allow transit-oriented development in a more focused way, in a master plan way, we really think that this would contribute to that kind of a commitment. You've heard a lot today about tools for developers and the city. This is the kind of thing that will give developers tools and clear visions. It will also help the planners to be able to work with folks and be able to come up with things that are really going to be serving everyone. Clearly, we need parking, but we also need to make sure that our sidewalks and our bus stations are equally as vibrant and useful. The other thing that we are very supportive of this process, and this one was a little bit hard, the fact that it is an opt-in. In the beginning, we really wanted this to be we have to do this, we have to do this. But the way our city works and the way our development has occurred over the last 10 to 20 years, this option makes it so that we're not restricting anyone, but we are very, very clearly giving the direction that this is where we need to go. And so the Downtown Improvement District and Holly Barrett as a private citizen very much supports the changes that this will make and then the master plan that will come out of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Barrett. Artful use of the third person, too, by the way. Next proponent.
Luis Jimenez,
3306 Birch Street. I participated in the transit-oriented development when the public was asked to participate in forums, and I was very supportive at the time. I think they had a good idea of what they wanted to provide, and as far as I understand it, with the zoning, that needs to be the focus right now, so that it allows for this development. One thing I would say, though, is that if this is going to encourage upward building, like where you have multiple stories for residential housing, I think that's going to be a good thing, and hopefully that happens. Thank you.
Thank you. Next proponent. Mr. Ewell, welcome.
Thank you. All right. Good afternoon, President, City Council. Greg Ewell, the Executive Director at MAPPA 2222 Cumming Street. We did submit a letter as a proponent for this, and I just want to step back and give you a little bit of our perspective from the regional perspective. I think it's obvious that the city and the planning department have done a wonderful job at really taking into account the neighborhood concerns and looking, and so I'm not going to get into the minutia of all of the codes themselves, but MAPPA just approved the long-range transportation plan for the region, looking out long range. That was approved by our council officials earlier this month, and it has some concepts in there, including these that you see here. So these are just concepts. Don't get caught up on where the exact roads are, but this is looking at how can we grow into the future and how can we provide these multimodal corridors. Obviously, you heard the Orbit project coming online. We know that's the most significant investment in transit we've had in decades in our region. So we just think it's very important as we're doing that this be successful. We set it up for success to the extent possible. MAPPA did commission a return on investment assessment that was completed earlier this year. It said, what if we build out premium quality transit on some of these corridors? What's the ROI on that in terms of cost benefit? And it showed that there is definitely a benefit investing in transit in our community and making that successful, but that the real benefit comes when we have complementary development and land use with that transit service. So if you just have the transit service, but the land use isn't supporting it, it doesn't work, and vice versa. So really, it's important that we have that walkable development. If you think where somebody, that a family can have a stroller going down the sidewalk, where can the elderly feel comfortable walking, it just creates that virtuous cycle where people feel that they can get around, certainly using a car, but also using other modes of transportation. So all that is to say, this seems like a really significant, important step in the right direction, and we see this as setting an example not just for Omaha, but for these future corridors and throughout the whole region. Thank you.
Thank you. Next proponent.
Grace Thomas, 3018 South 33rd Street. I'm here as well with the Missing Middle Housing group as a volunteer. We're in support of this effort, but I would like to encourage council to consider this as one of the first efforts needed to update the city zoning code. More choices are needed in Omaha, especially in the core area, such as additional multifamily housing, townhouses, and other types of non-large lot single-family housing options. These options will benefit older populations looking to age in their neighborhoods in smaller homes, young talent looking to live in walkable neighborhoods close to businesses, residents in needs of more affordable units, and homeowners looking to add extra revenue or support for their family members in the form of accessory dwelling units, the ADUs, that we're excited were included. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next proponent, please.
Good afternoon, Lauren Sensick, Chief Executive Officer of Metro Transit, also at 2222 Cumming Street. I will be brief. my agency submitted a letter that was drafted by my predecessor, so I don't want to reiterate that, but I just wanted to say that Metro is very in support of this project. As mentioned by previous speakers, really thinking about land use and transportation planning and investments together and integrating that planning is really the key to making sure that our community is livable, is able to serve the mobility needs of our residents, and really just creating healthy communities. The focus on the pedestrian scale in this proposed ordinance is really important. It's important to remember that everybody who gets on or off a bus has to get to that bus stop. They're not riding the bus to just get to a bus stop. They're trying to get to their home, to their work, to see their kids, to the store. I just also wanted to thank the planning department for really including us in this process and commend them on a really inclusive process. And I think it's really a model of ways that Metro and the city can and should work together in the future to make sure that we are maximizing our investments together and our efforts.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents?
Sarah Johnson, 2316 North 52nd Street. I'll be brief. This is not as much of my area of expertise, but kind of speaking also on behalf of Mode Shift Omaha, proponent of the TOD plan here. Anything that's going to improve the pedestrian experience, definitely, I think we all could agree, Omaha could use some help in that department. So this is a good step, small but in the right direction. Also, little thing, excited about the minimum bike parking. Again, anything we can do to continue to show people in Omaha that you don't have to be tied to just your single occupancy motor-driven vehicle, bike, walk, etc. This is going to help all of that. And then, yeah, just further with the health line of things, sprawl is not helping anyone really, and anything that we can do to encourage infill as opposed to just never-ending sprawl is a good thing. And lastly, just to reiterate what a couple other people have said, this has been an inclusive process. Planning a lot of times does a really impressive job with really listening to the stakeholders and including people in the conversation. So I guess I just want to highlight that this is a good example of the community working together throughout multiple departments. So good process, good first step. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents?
Larry Store, 5015 Lafayette Avenue, Omaha, 68132. You know, homework involves a lot of things. I'm opposed to this, these 4, these 5. Number one, I don't understand all the language that's used in the written documents or on the attachments. I don't have time to read all the amendments. Part of my homework is driving down Dodge Street and thinking, gee, if I can't drive my car anymore, how am I going to get around Omaha? My God, there's 10 blocks at least between orbit stops. Pretty soon it'll be all the way to Fremont, probably. What happens for people like me, for example, that lives somewhere in between the 10 blocks? Do I have to rent a bicycle to get from one to the other, for example? How do I get from my house to 50th Street to Dodge Street to ride this monster? I mean, it's big enough that it probably doesn't have to travel 10 blocks to be able to go in 1 or 2 of the doors. Taking up a whole lane of traffic for traffic all the way to 72nd Street or West Roads now, maybe further. So all I'm saying is, thanks for all the hard work that everybody does, but it's not easy to do your homework when you don't really know the truth and the media doesn't cover it. I watch the news, I listen to the radio every day, and I come down here every week. It's not really explained. Now today there's some charts, but the citizen gets one crack at it down here today. First hearing. Doesn't get another chance until maybe the day of a vote. But words do matter. There's a lot of words in here that kind of scare the hell out of people. Urban planning. What does that mean? Can I build one of these 300 square foot houses on my driveway and put it there? Can I put that on wheels and drive it away? And finally, since the yellow light is on, I really wish that if you want to insinuate to me as I walk away or I sit down that I'm ignorant or that I am untruthful, please have the guts to do it while I'm at this podium. Call me a liar to my face. Don't insinuate as when I'm not here. Have the guts to do it to my face and name me. Don't imply that all the other citizens like me
Your time's expired.
are imbeciles and are ignorant and don't do their homework. It's not true. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other opponents? The public hearing is closed. Planning Committee Chair Pete Festerson, you're recognized.
Thanks, Mr. President. I too want to thank the department for all their work on this. As you can tell, it was a lot of work. And I'll come back to that in a minute, but they just explained hundreds of pages of documents and that are technical in nature, I think in a very appropriate and easy way to understand, as well as the charts and some of the maps that I'll come back to here in a minute that help explain it as well. I also wanted to acknowledge Ms. Sensick here. I appreciate you being here and your support of this as well. Welcome back to Omaha. Haven't had a chance to see you yet. I know we all look forward to working with you on the future of transit in this city. And I think Mr. Ewell actually had to leave, but he testified in support before he left on behalf of MAPA. I wanted to acknowledge that too, because probably about 2 years ago, certainly it was back when travel was okay, a delegation of us all went out with MAPA to Pittsburgh to look at how transit is done well and how transit-oriented development can work. Councilman Palermo was with me on that trip, and we saw a lot of great examples about what we're talking about here today. So we have come a long way from that educational phase of this discussion. And so I am supportive of transit-oriented development, supportive of transit itself, and more diverse housing options throughout our city, often now referred to as the missing middle, which I think is important too. And increasing density in our residential and commercial areas, which is important to the health of a city as well, and has lots of different implications for the health of our citizens, but also the provision of city services. But whenever you do discuss zoning changes, it's important to understand the details and the potential impacts and to engage neighborhoods in that discussion. And I think that is what has happened here in a positive way. What we've seen in terms of the transit-oriented development maps and the sub-district maps is a consistent progression with the orbit stations. They're going online here soon. And essentially impact areas from downtown all the way out to West Roads, mostly along Dodge Street. So primarily in District 1, my district. So I've been following this closely and engaged with the neighborhoods in this conversation too. And I would also acknowledge the department for that engagement process. That was very effective. You were very patient. I attended some meetings early on that were actually quite confrontational. So I think it is notable today that we have not only no opponents from neighborhoods, but we have neighborhoods supporting the effort here today and have submitted letters, lots of them, but ones that I would point out that we worked a lot with was the Dundee Memorial Park Neighborhood Association and also the Fairacres Association. There's also a very strong coalition of interest that are supportive of this today. I want to thank Mr. Green, I know, for his work in putting that together. That's pretty impressive. And I want to acknowledge the sub-district map that was the basis of a lot of this work. Mr. England, you want to come up and just put that up for me for a second? Thank you. And your name and address just for the record?
Sure. Eric England, Omaha Planning Department.
So I think you correctly pointed out for everyone, and it's worth reemphasizing, that this doesn't proactively rezone anyone's property, but it does set the expectation for the future about an opt-in process that the planning department sees as ideal going forward through the city. But any individual case, like any case right now, has to go back through the planning board and city council for approval, right?
Yes, that's correct. And yes, I'll leave it at that.
And when we look at the map here, when we vote on these items next week, we aren't actually approving this map. but I did request that it be an exhibit to item number 49 because I thought it was important to add to the record because it does represent a lot of the compromise and flexibility the department showed with the neighborhoods along these, what you might call the spine of our city. And in general, the darker the area, the more dense the anticipated zoning would be. The lighter the area, the less dense. And I think it does reflect appropriately our commercial areas, but then also the hope for increased density along these transit lines, but doesn't go so far as to making substantial or really large changes into areas that are 6, 7, 8 blocks away from the spine that I know was an initial concern, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the sub-district map is, we spend a lot of time on this and throughout the dozens of meetings and conversations with neighborhood associations. And it's partly reflective of existing zoning, but not all the time. If I could just briefly show you an example. So this is kind of a progression that we saw specifically to Dundee. So on your upper left is where we had originally started. Now I know we don't have all the labels on what this is, but if you look at that upper left map that says original, you see a lot of dark brown and then kind of an orange color that is mostly representative of what the existing zoning is as high density residential. R7s, R8s that would really allow dense apartment projects, a lot of height that would be allowed. There was concerns from Dundee Neighborhood Association, and throughout our constant continual meetings, we continued to scale back based on those concerns, conversations with council members, and where we ultimately ended up on the far right side is, I would say, much more conservative as what would be allowed as far as the intensity of the TOD district. So the lightest color is TOD4, which is basically similar to an R5 zoning, which is single family, duplex, townhomes, accessory dwelling units. And that's it. So for a majority of the Dundee neighborhood, specifically on the west side of 50th, north of Davenport, Chicago Street area, it's really protecting the neighborhood of what's there in place. And Dundee's, just like many of our neighborhoods along this corridor and throughout the city, is wonderful. And there are existing zoning classifications that will stay in place. If the Dundee neighborhood or any other neighborhood wanted to proactively come in and adopt one of the TOD districts as a way of almost protecting what they have in place, they have that option, and we could coordinate with them to do so. So going back to the sub-district map, we think it's important to not adopt this fine of classifications as part of the future land use map. So if you think back to the future land use map, we have very broad categories. The yellow represents low density residential. You have browns, that's high density, reds and pinks that are office and commercial. But it doesn't get down to identifying what specific classification. So in office and commercial, you have limited office, general office, community commercial, general commercial. You have all these categories of zoning, and so that's why we think it's important to have the land use map just reflect the TOD. But it's our full intentions, and this map will be available when we meet with developers on pre-application meetings or conversations saying, hey, we want to adopt TOD. What can the department support, or what does the city support? And we're going to utilize this map, and we have full intentions. And I'll go on the record, I don't want to be here in 4 months and say, yeah, we put this out there and then we're recommending something completely different. But we acknowledge that there needs to be a little bit of flexibility just because without knowing what the project's coming in. And while we spend a lot of time and looking at certain neighborhoods, maybe there's a block that we missed further, out west on the corridor. And we try to make it as perfect as possible, but we recognize that it's a process. And so we have all full intentions of applying this map and being transparent with that.
Great, thank you for that. I think that's right. This is a guide. It does not get adopted into our, our code or even our master plan, but I appreciate you acknowledging on the record that this is what the planning department intends to use as guidance going forward, because that really was the basis of the conversation with the surrounding neighborhoods. And I think it does strike the right balance between the mutual interest of maintaining the character of those neighborhoods and what they've come to enjoy, but also recognizing the value of transit-oriented development and increasing density and housing options throughout that area that does support our new transit system too. So to me, that's a win for everybody. Thank you for that. So I will be supporting these items next week, which are an amendment to the urban design element of the master plan, the land use element, the transportation element of the master plan, then also these code changes around transit-oriented development. The last thing I would just mention before I yield the floor, I didn't want it to go without saying that I am also supportive of the bike provisions that were mentioned, and also very supportive of the convenience storage provisions. This is something that has been driving a few of us crazy up here on the council. I see Ms. Melton nodding her head too. Probably goes back a couple years as well, when we saw a proliferation of convenience storage applications come through the planning department, come to the city council. Nothing they were proposing was out of line with city code or even the master plan, but it sure didn't seem to fit with the objectives of a healthy growing city or even the best and highest use of our land use propositions going forward. And throughout the city, I have some examples in my district that I was not pleased with and voted against in Benson, but most of the examples were in West Omaha, where we had large storage facilities on major intersections or prominent corners that just weren't the highest and best use of that land and did not promote good design opportunities or even good growth principles. And these weren't the nice ones. These were the garages with doors and fences that were, not where we want to be in terms of the design of our city. So I know not a lot of us voted against it at those times, but most of them did go through because they were consistent with the master plan, and I think the planning board felt they had to. But I think this will be a big improvement in that respect too, to give you an extra lens by which to critique those before they come to us and before they even go to the planning board, which is when that really needs to happen. So thanks for all your work.
Thank you, Councilmember Festerson. Councilmember Harding, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I too want to thank all those involved in the public process, which, as a quick aside, there was a lot of public process involved in this. There have been multiple public meetings that people were invited to give their 2 cents, and as Mr. Miller indicated, a lot of those ideas that were expressed and concerns that were raised have been incorporated into the final document. It also has gone through the planning board, so there was a public hearing there as well. But I appreciate the forward thinking and the integrated amendments that we have here before us that we'll be voting on next week that make Omaha a more healthy and attractive community for all of its citizens. So I want to commend the team, as many have done before, but there's been a lot of heavy lifting on this, and the team's persistence and openness to working with the community, I think is demonstrated in what we will be voting on next week. And finally, it does bear repeating that the TOD zoning is opt-in only. This is not a blanket rezoning of one's neighborhood if they're within some of those areas around TOD. It is totally an opt-in and will go through the same public processes that any rezoning request goes through. So that would be from planning department to the planning board and then to the city council. I look forward to voting in favor of this next week.
Thank you, Councilmember Harding. Before calling Mr. Fanslow up, I would be remiss if I didn't say a few things. First of all, for those who complain that they didn't know about this or they only had from Thursday to today when it was on the agenda to learn about this, is remarkable given the efforts and outreach planning did in a very conspicuous way to reach people and inform them, educate them, and allow input. What people in my district did, of those almost 2,500 people who actually participated and commented, There's thousands more who participated and just didn't comment. But I'd like to thank the planning department for making themselves available for all those thousands of people who learned about this, took the time to get on your website and read about it, or heard about it from their neighbors, or from meetings that they saw going on. And then if they didn't understand it, they asked. So if you don't understand it, you have yourself to blame. You didn't take the time to ask. Thousands of people did. And it's amazing. 95% of them were weighing in after going through a long self-education process to let the planning department know they supported this with some changes. The system works, folks. And if you don't think it is, you have yourself to blame. Look in the mirror. Own up. I didn't do my homework. But don't blame us. You didn't ask us. You didn't ask the planning department. You didn't participate. You come down here and give little sound bites. You know, that may work on Shout Radio, but doesn't work with me. So don't blame us and don't blame the planning director. Now, Mr. Fanslaw.
Yes, sir. Dave Fanslow, City Planning.
Several years ago now, this council, before all this began, passed a resolution unanimously asking you to do what along mass transit routes in this city?
Study the land use.
And once Ms. Sensick got a wonderful grant for BRT and that came along, what did you tell us you were going to do?
I told you we were going to study the land use along that route.
And here we are.
Correct.
And you said, just trust me. We're going to start with the BRT. We're going to figure this out. It's a lot bigger effort than you guys think. We're going to take time. We're going to do it right. And here we are.
Correct. Took a little convincing, but yeah, we got here, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I can echo the sentiments of my fellow planning committee members, the chairman, Mr. Festerson, and my colleague, Mr. Harding, but my charge to you is to not rest on your laurels, because there's a transit system, as we're learning along Dodge, if things like TOD and BRT happen, can enhance the urban living experience of our citizens and improve the live-work environment. It can promote transportation alternatives, whether it's mass transit, pedestrian, bike, or combinations, and spur, as we're already seeing along Dodge Street, tens of millions invested in new development projects.
I agree. We've already talked about what's next. So yeah, we're not stopping here. Absolutely.
So kudos and don't rest on your laurels.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk.
Item 53, an ordinance to approve an interlocal agreement with the Village of Sterling for Keno proceeds.
Public hearing on item 53 begins at this time. Are there any proponents?
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the council. My name is Bill Harvey, representing EHPV Management Group, lottery operator for the city, 11248 John Galt Boulevard. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about this proposal. Basically, what we have before you today is an interlocal agreement with the Village of Sterling. It's very similar to other interlocal agreements the city has entered into for Keno Lottery.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? The public hearing is closed.
Item 54, an ordinance authorizing and directing the issuance of various purpose and refunding bonds, tax exempt series 2020A, and various purpose and refunding bonds, taxable series 2020B, in the amount of $152,500,000.
The public hearing on item 54 begins at this time. Are there any proponents? Are there any opponents? The public hearing is closed.
Non-action items, items 55 through 79, do not require public hearing or city council consideration at this meeting, but will be placed on a future agenda for public hearing and/or vote. The reason for non-action is noted after the item on the agenda, as well as the date the item is expected to appear on an agenda for consideration.
Roll call.
Gray. Harding. Melton. Pauls. Palermo. Festerson. Mr. President.
Yes.
Motion passed 7-0. Meeting is adjourned at 4:24.